Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing leadership podcast series. So today's guest brings a different set of skill sets in his leadership pathway that I've not had on the podcast before, which will be great. Today's guest is currently the CEO of the Heavy Vehicle Industry Australia organisation. He started that role in February of 2018 and is a passionate advocate for the truck, trailer and component manufacturers sector. Before that, he spent 6 years with the Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, a national body. He initially established their South Australian office before relocating to Sydney to take on that state's role as state director. And in terms of his background, enjoys utilising his legal and public policy experience to pursue his advocacy goals, which is a great thing to see. He holds a Bachelor of Arts, Politics and Law from the University of Adelaide and has served on a number of boards and advisory bodies in relation to issues around infrastructure skills and safety. And to top things off, he was a former councillor in the City of Tea Tree Gully Council. So can I welcome to the podcast, Todd Hacking. How are you, Todd?
Good, Eric. Yeah, very good, mate. And you?
Mate, I'm fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. So,
Pleasure.
Look, I'll get to where I start with all the podcast questions, Todd, which is, in which industry was your first leadership role and why did you take that on?
Well, I think it depends how you define leadership, but for me, leadership is sort of motivating a group towards a common cause, and I guess I've had lots of leadership roles as a kid and growing up, but I guess in a professional sense, the first real demonstration of that was at the City of Tea Tree Gully, being elected at such a young age, and then in a by-election, and then losing an election, and then coming back and serving a full term. I guess that's that was really important for my development and in displaying leadership. For those that don't know, the City of Tea Tree Gully, it's on the outskirts of metropolitan Adelaide, about 100,000 people, ratepayers, and I was elected to the Hillcott ward, so I had about 14,000 residents, about 6,000 homes to look after, and we had a council staff of close to 400 and an operating budget of 70 million. So to sit as one of 12 elected members who almost operate as a board in a private company, to sit at that table at the age of, in my early 20s and mid 20s was a really great experience, so that's probably where I first had my leadership roles, Eric, and it's since gone on in a professional space, as you've alluded to, at CCAA and now at HVIA, which is my current role, and I'm loving every minute of it.
So thank you for sharing that, and so I have to ask the obvious question: what madness drove you to be a councillor on a council, Todd?
Look, I don't know. I think I was always raised in a home that valued community service and giving back, and I always wanted to do that in various ways in my life, and so I volunteered and was members of sporting clubs and all that kind of, on the school council at one point, and in student government and all those sorts of nerdy things, and but I loved it. I found it really rewarding. I found it challenging. I found that the more I did, the less I had to do schoolwork, and so that just led to me doing more and more. And at 20, I guess I thought, well, what's a way that can do a lot of that together, and council was one, because you could go to every sporting club, and you could go to all of the neighbourhood watches, and you could go to all of the community groups, not just one or two of them, so I thought I had a bit of a profile. I'll stick my hand up. I didn't think I'd actually win. I beat the former mayor and the former deputy mayor in a by-election. It was a big shock, but it showed to me, I think, that people out there and residents were quite happy to vote on a vision, on an idea, and on a positive policy platform. And they were craving a bit of a shake-up. And I don't know whether I delivered on that, but I certainly tried. And it was a really great, 5 or 6 years. I said I did lose. I won a by-election, and then I lost a general election, and then I came back and won a general election. So, all of those experiences, and some really tough issues at the time. It wasn't just the community side of it; it was the professional side of that I really loved, and the policy side, and it was really valuable for my growth, and I really enjoyed my time on council. It can be frustrating, it can be annoying, and there's politics involved and all of that, but that's also in life as well, and you've got to just get used to that. So it was I don't know. In the short answer, I don't know what madness drove me to it, but I had a good time.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of different things drove you to that, and that's great. Thank you again for sharing that bit of background. So yeah, like I outlined in the introduction, you served in advocacy organisations in the past. So let me put the following to you: in your experience working in the industries that you've had, have you found a difference between the leadership and management function?
Look, I think they're linked. But what I would say is that I think you can be a good manager and be a hopeless leader. But I don't think you can be a good leader without having good management skills. So to break that down, and if you take my definition of leadership, which is sort of motivating or inspiring others, I think you can, in a corporate sense, you can be effective at managing people and getting a job done without inspiring leadership. So I think, in one sense, I think one's more tangible than the other. I just don't think you can be a leader without being a really good manager.
No, and that's great, and that link's been made before. I think you're right that you having your leadership skills, you need that level of managerial skill set behind you, but going the other way with the management function as it's been described to me before is not that it's not an important part of the organisation, but it's more operational in nature. Yeah. In some organisations than strategic or taking that sort of bigger picture look at where you work. Okay, that's great. So let me lead you into the next area, and this is around leadership style. So leaders sometimes make mistakes. How do you, Todd, engage with a error or mistake that's attributed to your leadership?
Well, I try not to make them. That's I find it much easier to try and cut them off at the pass. But
sure.
Look, if I do make them, and we all make them. I think it's important that you acknowledge your role first. Like I always, there's a common adage, leaders lead from the front. There's another really good adage which I use a lot, and that's success is as many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And I it's true, and I try not to be that. I try to, if I make a mistake, I think it's much easier to own it. I think the people that you work with and your teammates and your colleagues and your peers, they respect you more, and you inspire a greater deal of leadership when you don't throw one of them under the bus, and you cop it on the chin, and you accept the consequences. And I think part of, some of the consequences, sometimes those consequences will be quite minor. I think we build them up too much in our head, and that stops a lot of people from coming forward and accepting that responsibility. But sometimes those ramifications will be minor. Sometimes they'll be major, and you've just got to accept that and deal with it and move on. But I think if you don't acknowledge your role and accept the responsibility, if you try and pass the buck, if you try and shift the blame, ultimately what you're doing is undermining your team's natural instinct to defend and motivate and inspire, working together. So I think the first and most important thing is you've got to own it, and then you've got to listen to others. I mean, none of us are, the fonts of all wisdom. We all have to surround ourselves with the right people, and we have to listen to their advice. Doesn't mean you have to do everything that they say, but it does mean that you've got to listen and ask a lot of questions and understand where you're going, and then ultimately, sometimes you've just got to make a judgment call. Ultimately, you've just got to trust your gut. You can put all of all the policies in place. You can surround yourself with the right people. You can listen to all of the advice, and you can trust your gut, and you can get it wrong. And I think if you then own it and then you try and stop it from happening again, then I think you'll be ultimately in a better place. And I think that's the important thing, is you got to learn from it and try not to repeat it. So whatever chink in that chain, whatever link in that chain let you down, you've got to try and ensure that it doesn't happen again.
What do you think is the most difficult part about being a leader?
I think leadership is a choice. I honestly believe that whilst I think all of us are born and have the innate biological and character traits to become a leader, not everyone wants that responsibility. Ultimately, the most difficult part of being a leader is to accept that sometimes if you're going to be a really good leader, you have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. You do have to be the one that accepts ultimate responsibility. And if you're not prepared to do that, if you're not prepared to make those sacrifices, then it's really hard to build the team and to motivate the team to work with you or for you. So I think that's the most difficult part, is accepting that at times you're going to have to sacrifice yourself for the ultimate success of the team.
So let's go somewhere a bit more positive. How do you measure success as a leader, Todd?
Well, I think it's really dangerous if you start to do it. Personally, look, I've always tried to leave that to others. Others would judge you by your perceived success, by wanting to be involved, by participating, by wanting to do more, by showing initiative, and by being ambitious and enthusiastic and protective of you. When you've got a team around you that want to protect you and want to see you succeed, then ultimately I think you've got a really good platform for success. I don't think you can measure your own success. I really think it's hard to find objective professional metrics to measure it for you. That they're out there. If you pay a consultant enough money, they'll tell you whether you're successful or not. They'll do some sort of survey for you. But I think the simple answer is that people know. People know when you're being successful or driving a successful team, because they want to be part of it. And when you'll just sense it in the culture, you'll sense it in the people around you, you'll sense it by others' willingness to be involved and their will to do so. So I think that's how I measure success. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but I think that's the best way to do it. Leave it to others.
Yeah, look, there's no right or wrong answers here. It's more about your perspective, and that's an interesting one. It's oftentimes success can be a many-layered thing. So, if people want to work in the organisation, you've got good retention, you don't have people wanting to leave every other week, then, there's signals that your culture is a good one that people want to be in. I guess that comes from the leadership of the place. This kind of segues nicely into, I've got some 3 statements here, and I think I might be able to judge where you might go with these, but see if I get proven wrong. So the first one is, on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Yeah, I think that's, I think on-the-job experience helps you gain the technical capacity and the knowledge of the team, the knowledge of the environment. So yeah, I think on the job experience helps with leadership. I don't think it's the be all and end all, but it's certainly, you can be a leader and be fresh into an organisation. But I think, it's as I said, it's inspiring the team around you. So, that's my definition. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I've never looked it up. But I think, if the on-the-job stuff helps you gain the technical knowledge and the capacity and the understanding of the environment and the situations that ultimately are inputs that help you make the right decisions, and improve that culture. So I think on-the-job experience helps, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
Sure, and that leads into the other side of the coin, I guess, is formal education helps to develop better leaders.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with that. Again, I think, formal education gives you access to critical thinking and analytical skills, and the opportunity to study some of the great academics and the great leaders of the world over time, and there are many. So I think that helps, but again, it's not the be all and end all. You don't have to go to university or TAFE or whatever to be an inspiring leader. Under my definition, you can be a leader simply by looking after your mate. I think you can inspire leadership in others by protecting them and advancing the interests of a common goal, toward a common goal. So, I think in a professional sense, formal education helps, but it's not everything. I've seen some amazing leaders in my time that have no formal qualification or degree or trade certificate, and yet they still, in my mind, display great character traits that make them a leader.
And that's a partial response to this last one. Leaders are born, not made.
Yeah, well, that's probably a philosophical question that goes back to, what came first, the chicken or the egg. I guess my way of looking at it is, I think we all have a set of innate character traits that are the bedrock of leadership, but not everyone uses them all the time. I think we all have the biological makeup to be leaders, but I don't think, under my definition of leadership as a choice, I think some people don't want to be a leader, and some people don't develop those skills either through formal education or on the job to become leaders. That said, you don't need those. You don't need those things, and I don't think you're born a leader. I think you've got to actively choose to be a leader. But I certainly think that you're born with the capacity to become a leader.
That's really interesting, because most people either go for one side or the other, and the argument that we're all capable of it is just whether or not you want it, and a number of other factors. Because some of the guests that I've had on the podcast have said they sort of were thrust into positions of responsibility and they liked it, and they excelled from that point on. And so, yeah, it can get very nuanced, this thing about whether or not a leader is born or made. And we've all met people that fit the bill either side. And
yeah, for sure. There seems to be an aura around a leader. There just seems to be a quality in them that makes you want to follow them, that makes you want to be a part of what they're doing, in whatever capacity that is. And I think we're all born with the capacity to do it. It's just whether or not through your life experience and your life skills and your education and your training, and your on-the-job experience, whether you end up, expanding on them and developing them to a point where you utilise them effectively as a leader. It's when I think of really great leaders, and I was thinking about it in probably a more military sense, going back to medieval times when the leader was the first one over the hill, in a battle combat situation. That goes against the human biological rationale to extend life. To be the first one in battle over the hill, to lead the charge, goes against our self-preservation qualities. So how are you born with that? That to me is a difficult equation to come past.
Just going to say it's a very profound thing you said there, because that this idea that leadership is, the process of being a leader is sometimes contrary to your innate sense of self-preservation and best interest, because at times you've got to stick your neck out and be fully accountable and be the buck stops with you type analogy. I think that's very interesting, and for those that I think do it well, and I've met those leaders, and I'm sure you've met them in your travels, that there's almost no fear of that side of it, that you just get in and do and make decisions, and hopefully they've been made with the best information available at the time to get the best outcome that you can possibly get in whatever sphere of life it is. It doesn't have to be in the corporate world. It can be in the not-for-profit space. It can be in any position where you've got someone in a leadership role. That makes sense.
Well, there's a trust there. There's a trust there, and the only way that you develop trust is through personal relationships, and the only way you develop those is through cultivating a relationship with a herd. It's about making that person in your team feel safe. When people get anxious and they don't feel safe and they think that you're going to throw them under the bus, they're not going to work hard for you. They're not going to want to protect you. They're not going to want to show initiative. They're not going to want to encourage others. They're not going to want to show the next person down the line that they're valued and they're safe and they're protected. And so I think, probably it all depends on your definition of leadership, and my definition of leadership is probably one of 1,000, but the best. When I was thinking about this, I firstly used a sporting analogy. The leader is the captain. The captain marshals the teammates on the pitch towards a common goal, and that is to score more than the opposition, or to whatever. And then if you use that same analogy in battle, which I've sort of kind of already done, and then when you use it in a corporate sense, I kind of then agree with that to a degree. I sort of nuance it a little bit, because I don't necessarily think that, the ultimate leader is probably the person that's the alpha, the person that's going to accept responsibility at the end of the day. But you can show leadership in other positions, because I don't necessarily attach leadership just with a position or a title or a pay bracket or whatever.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's come up too. That people can demonstrate some very astute leadership skills and or decision making without having the formal title, and that often being able to break that mold and not worry about what the title is getting the work done, is that sort of that next step that you've been alluding to, that you've got to not worry about the title and worry about getting to the goal and getting your people there and wanting them to have the same goals in mind. And that's I guess that's the trick.
Well, you can get out of kilter, you can get out of balance in that respect, because too many cooks spoil the broth, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. If you have it too top heavy, if you have too many leaders that that don't necessarily sit around and actually do stuff, then you can get that balance out of kilter. So look, I think leadership in a team, everyone can possess it, everyone can demonstrate it, but ultimately you have to all follow a particular leader, and that's either the chief of the tribe, or it's the captain of the team, or it's the CEO a managing director or whatever of an organisation, the president of a community group, the mayor of a council. I mean, you can use any analogy you like. So yeah, that's I guess probably a long-winded answer, but
no, and that's look. This is what these podcasts are about, and I understand what you're talking for. Leadership can come in lots of different formats. So I want to get into the issue around leadership capabilities. Now, this is the bit in the podcast where I'll take a bit of a selfish approach here because I'm actually still doing some studies and I'm looking at two particularly critical leadership capabilities, at least what I'm finding that in the literature, that being strategic thinking and foresight. Now, I'm looking at those in the context of the ag sector, but more generally, and I'm not asking you to necessarily agree or disagree with my study, but what in your travels, how critical or not critical do you think strategic thinking and foresight are in a leader of today?
well, there's a lot to unpack there, Eric.
Sure, that's all right.
Yeah, well, look, I think being an effective leader, I think strategic thinking and foresight are two really important skill sets. You know, I sort of look at strategy and strategy and tactics a bit differently. I see tactics as more operational, more day-to-day, and strategic thinking, being more, visionary and very much linked to leadership, because it's about sort of removing yourself from the operational day-to-day stuff and setting an environment that's bigger, painting that bigger picture, painting that vision that you hope that people will join you in trying to achieve. If my definition is to succeed, then you've got to have a goal that a group of people are moving towards together to achieve. And so I very much think the vision and the capacity to build that vision or to make that vision is very much the product of strategic thinking. So, yeah, I would agree that that leaders, whether it be now or in the future, very much have to be able to do that, because without it, you won't necessarily work towards an end goal. And if you're not working towards an end goal, then you just drift. You end up in operational mode, and you just drift. So I'd agree a lot with strategic thinking. And look, it's a really tough skill because it's hard to learn. It goes against the grain of who we are to sort of not be emotional, to step back from what we're doing, and to set an alternative, not an alternative path, but to keep your eye on a future prize. I think it's really tough, and if you've got any tips about how I can do more of it or do it better, I'm all ears.
Todd, here's the last question, and this hopefully won't throw you too much. What would you say to that younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Yeah, well, if I answer that honestly, you'll probably have to get me on the couch at a
Sure.
No, look, I think, Eric, I would probably tell myself, I think I relied on people's opinions of me and too much. So, I think, when you do go back towards a political setting, it's all about a popularity contest, really. It's all about gaining votes and being more popular than the other guy. And so people's opinions of me mattered to me, and probably set me on a course of being a people pleaser. And I think that's good. I'm not saying to actively go and piss off your friends and neighbours and colleagues, but I think sometimes leaders have to go against the grain. You have to do what's unpopular in order to do the right thing and to make the right call. That's really tough. It can be really hard, but it's sometimes it's what's needed to be in the greater good. And I think it's really hard to do that from a position of popularity, or when popularity becomes too high on the barometer, for you. So, I would probably tell myself that I'd probably tell a younger version of myself that doing the right thing and making the hard calls that might not necessarily be popular is more important than making the wrong call but being popular.
Todd, thank you for your time. I know you're busy, and I realise that the world has to keep progressing beyond doing this podcast. So I appreciate your time.
I hope that was useful, and I hope whoever's listening out there got some benefit out of my ramblings for the last.
No, it's been great, man. That's the point of the podcast process, to get people to have a listen and think about what's being said. Once again, I'd like to thank Sydney Fish Markets for their support of this podcast, and thank you all for listening. I'll catch you all on the next podcast.